Geoffrey Little, Merrill House Committee member. I think we're just gone live. I'll say again, hello, I'm Geoffrey Little, Merrill House Committee member, and I'm happy to welcome you to our third James Merrill House virtual reading and conversation with our current writer in residence, poet Talvikki Ansel. And while we're waiting for others to log in, and before we introduce her, and while I hope you're settling in with a beverage of your choice and snacks, one of the great advantages of being at home watching a webcast, allow me to tell you a bit about Merrill House. Now a National Historic Landmark in the distinguished company of Mark Twain House and the Harriet Beecher Stowe Homestead, and also the ships, Charles W. Morgan among them, at Mystic Seaport. So we're a local treasure along with them. James Merrill lived in Stonington at 107 Water Street from the time he bought the turn-of-the-century building in 1955 until his death 40 years later. You can see on the screen a photo circa pre-1954 when it still had the witch's cap on the corner there above Zimmerman's Pharmacy. It's always had a commercial first floor, which Merrill personally rented to Doug's Barbershop and Sandy's Hungry Palate decades ago. In fact, both Doug and Sandy have been tenants now for more than 50 years. There are rental apartments on the second floor, you can see in the picture there. And Merrill and his partner, David Jackson, lived on the third and fourth floors. The fourth floor is a studio space under the eaves and a deck with a magnificent view overlooking Stonington. When we reopen to the public, there's the view and a bust of young Merrill. When we reopen to the public, I hope next year, I trust next year, if you've not visited, please contact us for a tour or attend one of our open houses. And tonight, please enter your questions for the writer in the comments section, and we'll have a discussion after the reading. And if you are so moved, please make a $10 or more donation on our website, www.jamesmerrillhouse.org. Though Merrill spent time in Greece, Europe, Japan, Key West, and elsewhere, as many of you know, Stonington was Merrill's permanent home, and both the village and the apartment make frequent appearances in his work. The Merrill House program itself began in 1995 at his death when Merrill bequeathed 107 Water Street to the Stonington Village Improvement Association, which still owns the property. It was an inauspicious beginning. I was on the SVA shortly thereafter with many of you watching, and I can tell you that the house landed on us like the one in The Wizard of Oz. At the time we were, and the VIA still is, a century-old, modestly funded nonprofit dedicated to improving life in the borough. We had no idea what to do with the house or even if we could keep it. The house itself came with no instructions in the will and no guidance from Merrill or his estate. One thing for sure, it was, as they say in the Middle East, a gift that eats. Long story short, however, with the help of the Merrill family and many others, over the years, we were able to stabilize the building and keep the apartments on the third and fourth floor, much as Merrill left them. The Merrill apartment today remains a magic place, a modest one-bedroom with a secret study, blazing colors, bat wallpaper you can see there, and objects that feature in Merrill's work, including the famous Ouija board, and there you see the secret study, as well as artwork and nearly 5,000 books that we've cataloged and conserved. Writers in residence now live in the small Jackson apartment next door, but are free to work and spend time in the Merrill apartment and the fourth floor studio and deck. And we hope to be inspired and at home. The first writer in residence in Merrill House was there by chance. He was a friend of Merrill's who asked if he could stay, I think, during his sabbatical, and he did, for a year. Since then, we've formalized the program and now have hosted nearly 70 writers, both emerging and established, as well as Pulitzer and prize-winning lecturers such as Claudia Rankine, Lori Moore, Jeffrey Eugenides, and many others from near and far. Our current writer in residence did not have to come from away, as she has lived in Westerly for the past 16 years with her husband. And as you may have read in the Westerly Sun article today by Nancy Burns Fusaro, she grew up in Mystic. By the way, if you're watching, Nancy, thanks for profiling a poet, and particularly this poet, and for the fine work you do in covering arts in our region. So Talvi, I believe, is our first homegrown writer in residence in 24 years. Talvikki, who goes by Talvi, first moved to the area when she was about 7 in 1970 with her family, as her father was a wooden boat builder who came here to take a job at Mystic Seaport. She attended the Broadway School, now condominiums, in Mystic and Stonington High School before going off to Mount Holyoke, University of Indiana at Bloomington for her MFA, and then spending 2 years at Stanford as a Wallace Stegner Fellow. Oh, I understand someone muted me. No? Are we good? Webcast blip. Bergen, just let me know in the notes if audio is okay. I'm not hearing it here. So, spending 2 years at Stanford as a Wallace Stegner Fellow. Growing up here, Talvi and her family spent much time outdoors, hiking, birding, and of course, sailing. You will hear in her work this evening a deep connection to the natural world, but I think an equally deep resonance to the metaphysical, mythological, and imaginary worlds. There are birds who speak, for instance, and much more. As I mentioned, Talvi returned to the area about 16 years ago, and when not in Westerly, she also spends time in Georgetown, Maine, where she resides in the former General Store. As a footnote, James Merrill spent 1948 in Georgetown, Maine, and Talvi is interested to see if his letters, which are being published next year, memorialize that stay. And when not teaching as an adjunct at URI or Three Rivers, you may find Talvi and her husband working on their 34-foot wooden ketch, Sinbad, moored in the Pawcatuck River. And Talvi, I'm sure you'll get as many questions from the sailors in the audience about that as about your poetry. We love our boats, as you do too. Now to the writing. Ansel was selected by the poet James Dickey as the 1996 Yale Younger Poet Prize winner. As it turned out, Dickey died soon after, and Talvi was not able to meet him. But Dickey left a laudatory introduction to her first published volume, My Shining Archipelago. He writes, Ansel's poetry is refreshingly original. She renders the heat, the closeness, the mystery, and the terrible fear of the undisclosed, the lurking, the waiting to happen. This is true imagination, true craft. Sounds like Dickey, doesn't it? I can't top that. However, as a small footnote, I did notice Talvi's first book was published with a grant to honor James Merrill, who had served as the Yale Younger Poet Judge for 6 years preceding Dickey. As a Yale Younger Poet winner, Talvi has another intersection with Merrill House. For the last 8 years, we have hosted the winner of the prize in June for residency annually. But I believe Talvi is the first winner to be a writer in residence in the years after her award. And you also find a trio of Talvi's poems from that first prize-winning book, Archipelago, in a new volume called First, 100 Years of Yale Younger Poets. A little program note, it's out this year, it's out now, and edited by Carl Phillips, the current judge of the Yale Younger Poets. And he will be giving the Merrill Lecture in October via webcast from the Washington University of St. Louis. So stay tuned for information about that. Talvi will be reading tonight selections from her more recently published poems, including her 2015 volume, Somewhere in Space, published by Ohio University Press as winner of the Charles B. Wheeler Poetry Prize, and also from, I think, her 2003 volume, Jetty and Other Poems. The Poetry Foundation describes Talvi's work as influenced by Robert Hayden, Marion Moore, and Elizabeth Bishop, for a long while a friend of Merrill's, until they had a falling out. The foundation also notes that Ansel writes spare, precise poems that balance on and often question the border between the natural and the man-made. I can't wait to hear them with you. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn the webcast over to you, Talvikki Ansel, sitting at the dining table under the cupola with the bat wallpaper in the background. Talvi, all yours.
Geoffrey, thank you so much. That was so generous, and I don't know if I can live up to it. But yeah, here I am in the room, and you can see some of the wonderful details about the space in back of me. Anyway, I'm so grateful for the generosity of the Stonington Village Improvement Association and the whole Merrill House crew for making this space and time available for writers. It's very generous. And as Geoffrey said, though I grew up in the area and I was sort of familiar with Merrill's work, I'd never been up to the Merrill House until 2 summers ago when I came up for an open house, and I was really entranced by the space. Just the distance in the view, from the roof deck over Fisher's Island Sound and the smell of salt, and then the intimacy of being in Merrill's rooms and that sense of being in a writer's space with his objects and all those books, 5,000 books, maybe more, I don't know. I think the first day or so I was here, I just sort of wandered around and read the spines of books, and it's quite a collection. So I'll just dive in and read some poems. This first poem I'm going to read is called Leap Years, and it was prompted by a little carved figure that I had sitting above my desk. So, leap years. The hippo of patience, but not complacency, stares out over the frozen landscape, icicles on the willow, sharp sun. Body of teak, flank grained horizontally. I was a tree, but now am a palm-sized hippo in a country of snow. Arrows in my blood. My ancestors became garden furniture, a table someone places a wet glass on to contemplate walnuts. Silver nutcrackers in hand, like the crocodile's jaw. My descendants, there were flowers, there were seeds, will become the decks of a boat exposed to sun and molecules of light. Will travel to secluded coves, night, planets, the Milky Way. Will feel the planer's touch, heels of the caulker as he tightens the planks. Bare souls as someone paces and figures displacement of the hull. How much fills this space? How much empties a hollow punched into the sea? Leap years or not, the days run away from me. Dangerous captain. Dangerous captain curried the favor of the rich, the mare's tails of the sky, coiled the hawser, ignored the gale. Yes, his glare at the helm, haphazard reckoning. Blue seeds of the walking bush sewn into our pockets couldn't evade him. Our hair tied back, we steered, hauled, looked ahead. Some saw channel markers or didn't. Sideways skip of a flock of petrels behind a wave, or that wave became which wave. This is where the women disembarked, and the boy with the drum. Up the pilings by the lobster pounds stink of bait bins. Did not come back with the milk and mail, stepped through the rockweedy shell shards. The wind came up, the wind beyond the cliff-bound houses, their flags straight out in the storm. Rock Island annexed. Their own rock island of rising wood smoke and the white gull's cry. The dangerous captain let go. Dangerous captain they lost touch with. They heard he left another harbor. Heard he scorned their slow selves, weeding the larkspur, sliding their identical children into the tide pool's cradle, counting boat shells and cockles. So the next poem it's kind of a found poem. It's based on, I did a series of a couple of really short poems based on trading cards that were found in boxes of Arm & Hammer and Cow brand baking soda in the 1920s. And I've carried these little cards around for a while. They had belonged to an uncle, and he turned them over to me. And on the front of each card, there's an illustration of a bird, and there are these gorgeous little paintings, and some of them were actually done by Louis Agassiz Fuertes. And because of the magic of computers and doing a virtual reading, you can actually see what they look like. So Louis Agassiz Fuertes did some paintings. There were other artists like M.E. Eaton, Hy Hintermeister, I think was the other artist. And then on the back of the cards, there was information about the birds and usually a statement about conservation for the good of all, do not destroy the birds. And then also suggestions for the many uses of baking soda. And then, so the ones that I have, it looks like they were once glued into a scrapbook, and you can see how, they've been torn out, and they're just these little fragments of language left on the sides. And I found that kind of intriguing. So in this series, the poems incorporate quotes from the back of the cards, and sometimes they're just little like fragments of quotes or truncated quotes. So I'll read just 4 little short poems from this series. So it's called Baking Soda Trading Cards Bird Series. And in each section, I have a quote from the back of the card at the beginning and at the end. So Baking Soda Trading Cards Bird Series. Card 8, Baltimore Oriole. An exotically beautiful bird with an equally beautiful song. And that's their quote. Hanging out laundry in spring, new song. Oriole back in the willow above the pond. Flash of orange, nest swaying below branch tips. Through wind and rain, tenuous comet shape of grass and twine and webs. Cards with the painted birds, miniature portraits from baking soda boxes, Arm & Hammer or Cow brand. Boxes of snow, the card's edges stained, bent, stored in an envelope. Put the black duck by the loon, by the scarlet tanager. Baking soda for all your earthly needs. Familiar, white, creaky as snow. For a safe fire extinguisher, simply tear open a 1-pound box and pour on flames. Card 4, ruby-throated hummingbird. The 2 white eggs, no larger than peas. Flame red throat like a down scalloped thumb. This way, gray-green, that way, red. Hummingbird among orange jewelweed, and back to the spot where the feeder hung last year. Childhood, the tabby cat under the clothesline, spotting birds in the apple tree. Bug-sized, they tear past the Nicotiana's white trumpets. One flattened on the road like a cicada, but a wing up, flag in the sky. I was here, valiant for a season, scrappy among the pines, leaving behind a lichen-covered nest, thistle-lined on an arching branch, coconut green Easter confection. Soak combs and brushes in a solution of warm baking soda. Card 19, gull. Glassware goblets, cut glass and crystal, sparkle when cleaned with a paste of baking soda. Up from the harbor onto the deserted golf course, we'd sneak around the perimeter's rocks to see the exotic pheasants on the field edge. Tangle of rockweed and mussels, oyster catchers' calls in fog along the green. Gull carcasses strung from bamboo poles as warnings, eye sockets eaten out, a webbed foot folded dry. At night, rocking under constellations, Cygnus the swan, waves lapping the boat's hull. Card 19, the gull, edges torn. Dropping rocks he, thrice before, time dropping the height, a remark, wisdom. For the good, do not destroy. Card 7, merganser, the appearance of a large, rakish-looking duck. In the big family, the mother drops the baby into the sister's bed. Warm bottle, sweetened with baking soda. Quick off in her robe to fix breakfast. Snow falling, erased against white ice. White again, as it drops into ashen-colored water. Mergansers dive beyond the dock. Shake drops from red, serrated bills. past the boatyard and cracked pavement scattered with broken clamshells, pink flesh hinging, white curves and purple smudge. The foundry, where out back you could read your fortune in drips on the sand, a cloud, a wing, an eighth note slanted. A package in your medicine cabinet and on your pantry shelf. So when I was thinking about poems to read, and with that one, I realized how many references are kind of familiar to the landscape around here. The golf course and the harbor, that might have been Fisher's Island. It was very quiet there and deserted in the 70s. Maybe we did used to sneak around on the golf course. I wouldn't have done that though, of course. So the next poem I'm going to read, there are a couple threads that go into this poem. It's called Somewhere in Space, so the title poem for this collection. And one of the threads, I was reading reading the work of a poet named Edith Sodergran, who she lived from 1892 to 1923. She was born in St. Petersburg. She was Swedish speaking. She lived in Finland. She attended German schools, and she was there on the border, between Finland and Russia during World War I. And she's just such an interesting writer. And also, it seems like she's, kind of on the border and not quite fitting in. Maybe the same way Kafka didn't really, fit into the different worlds where he lived. So there's some quotes from her poems in this poem, and there also another thread has to do with feral cats. A feral cat had some kittens in her backyard, and what else? The first line of each section is kind of the title for that section, or the subtitle, and yeah, so I'll read a few sections from this. It's a longer poem in sections. And the other thing I was thinking about this when I was writing this was sort of how difficult it is to know really, anyone's life, whether it's a feral cat or a swan or a historical figure. So I was kind of thinking about that when I was writing this poem. So it's called Somewhere in Space. Calico gray ragtag, she chose our crawl space. Calico gray ragtag, she chose our crawl space. Pile of insulation unmoored to the floor or ceiling. Entry above the plywood, tacked there. Temporary cover for the hole beneath the house. Dark body circled. Eyes panned back at the flashlight. Miner's glint. She chose the dark cave under the shed in summer. Trail of kittens out to the thick iris fronds swaying shelter. The runt, ripple of white and gray. Calico, orange kitten who bent his shape growling over the heart of a chipmunk. They know their terrain, their paths. They know their terrain, their paths. Materialize for food, for sun, slip into the broken panel of the cold frame, to sleep on the lettuce and beet shoots. Wary, they eye the trap, cornered, twist and dash, eddy of tight muscles, eyes dilate. What am I setting traps? Someone hates them, someone tolerates them, someone wants to tame them. Their route through the backfield of chicory and goldfinches, woodpile to porch steps and the prickly gooseberry where they rub their faces. Over the back wall and gone, feral orbits scrutinized. They can't be relocated. They know the wren in its frenzy on the fence, the dog who does not chase. And this section begins with a quote from one of Sodergran's poems. On foot. On foot, I had to walk through the solar systems before I found the first thread of my red dress. Fabulous quote. Edith Sodergran cradles her huge cat Tati in the photos on the borders of her country. The critics hate her poems. She and her mother in the Russian dacha in the Finnish town, where she speaks German and writes in Swedish. Food supplies cut off, TB. The townspeople think she's mad. Tati in sun, Tati on a chaise lounge. Electric fur, paws curled. The Russians shoot her cat. His remarkable face spots, blissed out gaze, in her arms, in all the photos except the first. Studio portrait, a child in a plaid dress, stuffed chaffinch on her arm, wings spread to the left and right margins. In a week they are gone, did the mother. In a week they are gone. Did the mother give a special call to signal we are moving, follow me? Did the black snake come, scream of the fisher, its minky body? Was it dusk, at dark? Stillness enfolds the yard and garden. Land the child knows, where raspberries grow in the garden, wild blackberries, where the fox grapes drop to the pine needles. If you ask, dim adult, how did you remember? Silence. The cat's dark tunnel under the shed, empty now. Even the grandmother's song of the cat coming back won't return them now. Further afield, path by the river, old quarry where laurels bloom, right angle turn along the fence. After I dumped the failed jelly by the rotten. After I dumped the failed jelly by the rotten herring, I felt better. Some things you cannot save. And they were feral, the cats who appeared over the wall like smoke, slid into the underbrush of dark jewelweed and viburnums by the stream. Though I tried to watch their night movements, tried to know their lives. One solitary in snow, footprints over the woodpile, under the back steps, down the path to the chicken coop. One clown-like ripple on the grape arbor, chased dry leaves, wind tracing the yard. And didn't the orioles wing down to eat the jelly, and some night wanderer leave a neat hole where the herring was buried? Coming back into the yard, something's off. Coming back into the yard, something's off. A spot, white and orange, hovers against the green, moves, floats, jags back and forth against the brush line. It's a swan, blundered into the backyard. Sway and careen, it jabs and jabs, head through the fence against the closed gate. Over the ditch, list and jab, it can't fly up. I open the gate, shush it through. Careening, it knows exactly where in the world it wants to go. Straight into the woods, heaves itself over briars and logs, disappearing white spot in the dense brush on short legs, fast, unsteady seeming, direction of the river it goes. Edith Sodergran also holding the leash. Edith Sodergran also holding the leash of a Karelian bear dog, a hunter of unyielding bravery and determination, wrote, "Somewhere in space hangs my heart, and sparks fly from it, shaking the air." Yesterday I thought, I want a birch tree there, and saw 3 slim trunks in a clump, my only deliberate thought. 3 white lines, vertical, and the cats weaving in and around them, and the girl on the rock under the birches. If a cat nests under your shed, is it your work to nudge and cajole the offspring into domesticity? If a wren nests in your yard, surely you will give it a wide berth until the nestlings fledge. Planetary, your movements around them, their incendiary hearts. So now we'll take a leap to pyramid building and the Nile. And I'm gonna have a little drink of water. So this poem's called Days of the Pharaoh. Days of the Pharaoh. A falcon eyes a dusty brown quail. Days of the rising Nile. Silted fields we tended, barley, bread rising in clay jars, honey and grit. 23 years, your yearly procession down the Nile to check on our progress. Weights of building blocks, the carvings and causeways. Before sun, ducks rose from the flooded fields, goose with its gray eye patch and trail of goslings. If you, then us too. Why did no one say that? Your boats prepared in their stone pits, oars and sail, blue amulets. Some of our men left from the village and never returned, their mallets and string lines saved. Cats waited on white butterflies, stared down iridescent beetles. The river brought everything to the site. Rafts of goods, linen-bound ibis, cattle, sheep, the slim dog along for the ride, asleep on drying papyrus. In your leaving, you diminished us. Even the small shrew in its heat, its dash through reed stems and light dappled bank, had a net of haste about it. Little conduit, narrow blood artery, who am I to channel this? Snail scrollwork written of her. And then one final poem. This poem's called Apples, and this was actually in the, it was published in the Yale Review when J.D. McClatchy was editing the review. So another little Stonington connection there. So yeah, last poem, Apples. I kept my toads in a cage, circled beneath the apple tree. They said I was cold. I was not, but I stole. See me there at dusk, thinking no one cared about the apples they were abandoned, carrying them home, t-shirt heavy, bulging with their weight and roundness, in the softening green, tree limbs glowing. We go back to patterns, the circles weeded beneath trees I repeat here, dirt crumbled and heaped up neatly like a dry mix before baking. Or how laying out the garden plan, I shaped out rectangles, beds jutting out from the stone wall, anchored there perpendicular-wise. I merely watched, was aware of the toads' round-shouldered figures coming out from the sage at night, their gold-flecked eyes, remembering one that long ago followed me into the house, silent familiar in the corner on the wood-floored porch or by the garbage pail. In a cage of twigs and chicken wire below the orchard's trees. Go back to the monk's tour of Manhattan Island's orchards, 1715. Stone fruits in sweet abundance. The caged toads at the bases of trees, unmolested by the dog who looks over them, inscrutable as to their bitterness. A sticky globe, apple red, tangles flies in the boughs. The toads are rewarded. The sweet taste of coddling moths, the steady plowing grubs that come to the trees. There's always more to think of regarding apples. The graft enclosed in wax-bound string, a severed and healed branch, roots seeking calcium growing into the skeletons of Roger and Mary Williams. This apple tree floating in the back field, but not really alone, the grubs, toads, green smudge of lichen on its limbs. The great crested flycatcher who shrieks above later in the summer season, across the stone wall, another apple's buds, the calcium in our bones, bearing our sweet weight into evening. All right, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Talvi. Wonderful. Please put your comments in on the Facebook or via the YouTube channel. And if we have questions for Talvi, we'll read them live. We have one from Jody. So she was excited to hear you read. So a friend.
Hi, Jody.
I can certainly hear a lot of. I felt I heard more Maine than Stonington. So Maine really holds a place in your heart and your writing. True?
Yeah, I love Maine. That coastline and yeah, the house I've had there for a while has a sense of history to it too. My dad lived up
There
there for
was a
that.
general store you mentioned,
Yeah,
but no longer.
no longer. I'm there, and
You,
there's no
you've
there's no general
domesticated
store.
it. You're not living above the store as Merrill did.
No, I'm not. Or as yeah, the character in Eudora Welty's story, why I live at oh that's at the PO, but
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, I think that coastline, just something very very appealing to me. The water, having the water and the land, and
Yeah.
the migrating birds and so forth.
And you mentioned that you had come back to the Northeast. You'd spent time based in Virginia, and as teachers and writers do, peripatetic other places in your life, but chose to come back to the Northeast for the winters and the cold, which I understand, but other people think we're crazy to do that, right?
Yeah, I had, well, after I did the Stegner Fellowship out in California, which was really amazing. I'd never been to, yeah, I hadn't been to California before, and just, different birds, and you could swim outside in outdoor pools all year long.
Hmm.
And then, after my book was published, I did, as you said, sort of the peripatetic, picking up visiting teaching jobs here and there, and um, yeah, some gardening jobs too. And then I was in Virginia, but I kind of missed the landscape here, the winters, the seasons. It's sort of, I guess, ingrained in me in a way, and I miss that.
One I think sounds in so much part of your work. Birds play a big role, but when we spoke before, you said you're not a birder in terms of, doing the big year or the life list.
Oh
Talk,
no,
talk
I'm
about the role of birds in your work. It seems a thread.
yeah. Well, when I was younger, I did have a bird list, but I guess I let it go, and I've been lucky enough to be able to volunteer on different people's field projects. But I think as far as appearing in poems, they're just they exist here in the world with us. They're sort of fellow travelers, and in watching them, you realize you're watching the lives, the interesting, fascinating lives of these other creatures, and yeah.
Mm. And cats enter into the picture quite a bit. Are you a cat person?
Well, I like cats, dogs, birds. Yeah,
Mm.
the cats came. The ones that came into that poem sort of came in on their own accord. They were sort of ferals and strays, and some of them, yeah, got adopted into the house and ran up, huge vet bills at the kitty dentist and things like that. So, yeah.
I'm not. I don't. I've never had cats. I don't know about kitty dentists, but
Oh, you
it's
really
a
want to know.
okay. That's a sidebar. Your discovery or your personal discovery of the Edith sonogram, is it? Do I have that right?
Sort of grand, yeah.
Sonogram. How did you come across her? She sounds fascinating.
I don't know. I can't remember. I was probably just browsing somewhere and
Hmm.
picked up a collection of her books, or a collection of her poems. They're translated. I yeah. Oh, and the book and the translator, it's listed in the notes section at the back of this book, because I did take a couple quotes from it. But yeah, there's just something about her, and kind of the inventiveness of her writing too, to throw in images of planets and things like that, that it really appealed to me.
Hmm.
Her work.
Who else are some of the what other writers have really influenced you and you return to?
Um, a lot of writers do influence me, and I think sometimes in ways I don't realize until later. You know, when I'm writing, Marianne Moore is often a poet that I go back to read. Well, W.S. Graham, who was in Cornwall in England. I liked his. I've recently discovered his work and really loved the sort of the texture of his language and his sense of line, really strong. My second book, well, has a longer poem where I was really interested in Fernando Pessoa, the Portuguese writer. So it kind of depends, and often it's just some odd discovery. And I think that's one of the really compelling things about being here in the Merrill House, because there's so many books, and I've sort of pulled a few out just to, remind myself that I want to read them while I'm here. And a poet I was just revisiting was Bridget Pegeen Kelly, who was one of Merrill's picks for the Yale, and rereading her first book. It's just gorgeous, really.
It is, isn't it?
Really lovely.
Yeah, such a loss that she's not.
Yeah.
Your friend Jody has a question, wants to know what you're working on now.
Hi,
and
Jody.
Also, how has the Merrill House inspired you? Speaking of pulling
Well, Jody, thank you for asking. Just working on more new poems, and I don't really have, when I'm writing, I don't really have an idea of what a book is going to do, but a lot of my writing happens in the process of writing. So I'm just, working on new poems, seeing where they take me, but there isn't a specific, not a specific, idea behind the collection, but just sort of writing poems, accumulating poems. Some of them seem a little elegiac. I've lost a few people recently, but not completely that. And how has the Merrill House inspired me? Really, it's provided, that space and time that's needed, and I will see what comes up from that space and time. Not quite sure yet.
You confided to me that you're a slow writer, and I'm sorry if that's a painful question, but what does that? It's nothing. What does that mean to you?
Right.
And you also said something interesting. You were talking about form, that you chose the form of poetry, but not necessarily putting yourself forward as I am a poet. This is that you inhabit the form. It sounded like.
Well, yeah, it's just a form that I just gravitate towards, and I'm really comfortable with. I don't know what it is. Something about shaping poems that I just really like to do, and I guess I think more in lines than in sentences or paragraphs, if that makes sense. And slow. Yeah, I'm slow. I do a lot of, I do revise a lot, and I think it kind of ties into it, what I was answering to Jody about how I don't have a complete idea for a poem before I write it. I'll start with I don't know, sometimes it's a sound, or it's a phrase, or it's an image, or a glimpse of something, and then, maybe there are a couple of stanzas there, but a lot of, I find out things when I'm writing, and, I'll do lots and lots of drafts, and I usually, start out with it, just writing by hand. Then eventually I moved to a manual typewriter because I like the feel and the speed of that, and I feel I can feel this sense of a line when I'm doing that. And then finally, I'll put them on a word processor, and sometimes I'll cheat and try to just put it on a word processor, but they never work out to my mind when I do them that way. So slow that way, I guess.
Well, speaking of warming up as a writer, the questions have come pouring in, so people have warmed up their keyboards. One from Laura. Matthews, who's on the Merrill House. The poems read today range far and wide, from the cat in your yard to Finland and the Nile. What draws you to those foreign places, settings?
Gosh, I don't know if it's just something that's kind of imaginative and intriguing about them. And yes, I do, I'm very taken by the world around me, but sometimes it's nice to be inspired by something, further away. And and sometimes that comes from reading something
From reading
not in my little head, but somewhere else.
And
Sorry?
traveling there, or traveling there in your mind?
Well, both, but I've never been to the Nile, so that was a reading inspiration.
Yeah. Your friend Jody says your dad built boats and you live with a boat builder. Do you ever think about the overlaps or not overlaps between boat building and writing poems?
Yeah, I've never really thought about that. Maybe because I don't really build boats at all and I have zero skills, but I guess they're both building things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks, Jody.
So you're not dragooned into working on Sinbad? You're
I'm
doing the bright work, or no? I
did a little bit of sanding, but I'm not very useful.
Lynn Callahan asked, what directed you to apply to the Merrill House residency? Beyond the Stegner Fellowship, what other residencies have you been involved with? And we did see your connection to Bridget Kelly. I think the reclusive Talvikki biking, I think I saw the reclusive Talvikki biking on Water Street today, she says.
Hi, Lynn. Thanks for the questions.
I know that you only became aware of Merrill House as a program. You were aware of Merrill 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah, I did. I would see, notices about the fellowship, but I think, I don't know, because it was close by, I hadn't applied, but really, coming up at that open house, I was inspired to do it. Other fellowships, I did a Lannan residency, so talk about the contrast in landscapes. That was in Marfa, Texas. So very different from looking out on Fisher's Island Sound. And then I did a 1 week one at Edwin Wakefields' house in the quiet corner of Connecticut, which is, it's called Trailwood at that place up there. And yes, I was riding my bicycle, but Lynn Callahan helped me learn to drive, and so that's why I'm still riding a bicycle.
Helped you learn to drive when you were young, or first driving?
Yeah, yes. And I'm quite a good driver, thanks to Lynn Callahan.
I can imagine that. Thank you, Ren. Dee Aldrich asked, says, thank you for your reading, Talvikki. I'm interested to know what impelled you to become a poet, and who are the writers who've most inspired you?
Yeah, I don't know particularly why poetry. I do have books. We all in our family, we all read like crazy. We were, the family who didn't have a TV, so we would go to the library and just bring home stacks and stacks of books. And I still have some books of poems that, like little anthologies that were given to me, by my parents when I was a kid. So I do not know why poems, for some reason, that just clicked. And other poets, have inspired me. Let's see. I mean, definitely, like Marion Moore, Bishop. Who else? Recently, I was reading. It really seems to change too. It's kind of an ongoing thing. What I'm reading. For when this spring when we were doing a lot of staying at home, I was going through my bookshelves and reading things that have just been sitting there, and I picked up a biography of Coleridge, Richard Holmes's biography of Coleridge, and I started rereading Coleridge, which I read him in college, but I don't know, it just didn't click with me then. And now I just found his work, really entertaining and interesting. So I think it's kind of an ongoing inspiration of what I'm reading.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, I'm curious about your teaching. You and I had talked about, and you said you're not teaching poetry, you're teaching writing for the most part.
Yeah.
I'm curious in what your students are interested in and what they seem like to you. What are they reading? Are they reading poems? Are they reading widely? Just if you can.
Yeah, they're really, I hear different things from them depending on the course that they're in. At URI, I'm teaching, recently, courses on, research writing, and they write about some really, really interesting topics, and and a lot of them have, they're writing about the climate, some social justice things, and issues. So those are the types of things that they're very involved in. And at Three Rivers Community College, I teach a course that the students are reading poems, short stories, and plays, and they pick poets to write about, and some of them get find contemporary poets that they're really kind of entranced by. So
do they know you as a poet?
Probably not, unless they're Googling me online or something, which I hope they're not doing.
So you keep that separate.
It depends on the course that I'm teaching, because when I teach creative writing, then it's much more about writing poetry, and I talk about that.
Cynthia Elliott asked, do you approach writing like a job? I.e., do you sit down at your desk in the morning and keep going until the day is done?
It really depends on what else I have on my plate at the time. If I'm teaching and I have a lot of things on my mind, that can be hard to do, which is another reason why it's really nice having a residency like this, because you just sort of leave it behind. You go do your work, and you don't, run out to the chicken coop every 5 minutes to see if the chicken's laid a new egg or whatever. So no, I don't write every day, and I admire people who do sit down and write every day.
Mm-hmm.
But with me, it's kind of a juggling.
Right. Even though your home is only 8 miles away, this is a space apart.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Willard Spiegelman asks, your poems are highly visual and often object-driven. I wonder what the response you are having to living in the Merrill apartment, since Merrill himself wrote poems about objects and surrounded himself everywhere with objets that were meaningful to him.
Yeah, I find it really, it's just so curious to be here and to have so many things to look at. And, it's almost, in someone's house, someone who's, died, you really get a sense, seeing those objects, that you're almost in a little bit of a conversation with this person, and you can kind of understand why they might have thought an object was interesting, and, or wonder why they thought it was interesting. So it's a really special place to be. And, even things like there's that little ceramic dog, which reminds me, it's on that shelf. It reminds me of the dog in, Elizabeth Bishop's poem, that the dog that listens to the record player. It's
well, and also Merrill has a wonderful poem with the Victrola dog.
Yeah,
as a character figure in it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's we're just about at the hour. If there are any other questions or anything you'd like to ask, we'll make a little plug. Please contribute. The website is there. And I want to thank you, Talvi, very much for coming over from 8 miles
Yeah, it's a
away
long way.
and being with us in quarantine. And you got over just before Connecticut, put the quarantine back on Rhode Island. So
Did they? No.
yeah, so you really have been good. You've been that
Oh,
isolated. Yeah, they did a few days
I
ago.
didn't know that.
Yeah, you can only come over. You can only go over to Rhode Island for 24 hours.
I'll never go back.
No, no, I'm
I'll be here
sure they'll let
forever.
you back. We've had
You
many
won't get
writers.
enough.
We've had many writers say that. So,
Mhm.
especially in the early days, as I mentioned, when we were told by people who knew better, like, don't let a writer stay for a year because
We never go away.
never go away. They'll
Yeah.
own the place. But it was really wonderful to have you here. I'm sorry it's in time of quarantine, but I hope sounds like you're getting good things done. And really thank you for your reading tonight. And I hope everybody continues reading more of your work. And we look forward to seeing it in the future.
Thank you so much, Geoffrey.
All right.
Have a nice day.
You too. Good night.